So A1 so far has been all about cartoons. Cartoon is only one possible format for an A1 source. Another possible format for an A1 source is simply a quote, an extended quote like this one in front of us. So on Monday we're going to look at the next possible type of an A1 source, which is a quote. And I put this together, so there's no name attached to it. There's nobody being directly quoted here. Sometimes on an A1, it might have a name underneath. It might say something like Adolf Hitler from Mein Kampf. And sometimes that's distracting to the students because they think that the person's name is Mein Kampf, not Adolf Hitler. But there's no name here, so you don't have to say the source of this is, Dr. Frankenstein. It isn't. There's no name attached. I made it in-house. So when you break down a quote such as this, I would say read through it once in its entirety to see the big picture. What is the theme? First thing you need to establish is, what is the overall theme of this quote, of this source? Then once you break down the theme, there should be a connection between the theme and globalization, because that's our course. So is it connecting because it's exposing a problem about globalization? And within that, we should find an ideological perspective, an opinion about globalization. The ideological perspective that could be embedded in the source is that they're exposing a problem or they're exposing something great. They're celebrating globalization. That would be their ideological perspective, that we should either reject or reflect globalization. As we break it down, we should also talk about the significance of the source. Once we establish what the problem or the theme is, why should we care? What's the significance? Is there a division of society here? Would there be consensus? Would everybody agree with the ideological perspective that this source is promoting? But ultimately, as we go through those steps that you've outlined before, including the division of society, the bias and limitations, the continued relevance, thinking of case studies to extend the language that's on the page. When you have a quote like this, the number one thing you need to do, after you have a sentence or two at the beginning of this is the theme and this is how it connects to globalization, I would suggest going through it from top to bottom, line by line, sentence fragment or phrase by sentence fragment or phrase, and just explain what it means. That if you do that, you'll be at least at the 60% level, and depending upon how soundly and specifically you can connect what is here with the theme of the course, globalization, and ideological perspective connected to that, then you'll be getting close to that 80%. And then in order to achieve that sophistication and insight that is 100%, what you end up doing is you take what's on the page, you connect it to globalization, and you can further the perspective by showing not only what's here, but why is it on the page? What's the agenda here? What's the tone? What's their intended response? So looking at the big rocks of this source, let's see what's on the page. Although many see globalization as a relatively new phenomenon, it can be traced back thousands of years. So the purpose of that first sentence is to overcome some ignorance in society, right? There's ignorance in society that some people think, globalization, that's just like a 20th century or 21st century thing, right? Marshall McLuhan in the 1960s, the medium is the message, for the idea that the global village, that's got to be a new thing, globalization. Well, this unit that we have just finished on ancient globalization has taught us that it's not a relatively new phenomenon. We traced it all the way back to the Neolithic Revolution. So although the Neolithic Revolution is not mentioned in that first sentence, we can infer, remember that? We can continue what's there. We can infer that when they say it can be traced back thousands of years, it can be traced back to the Neolithic Revolution. So to add to what's on the page, you can infer, that's a reference to the Neolithic Revolution. And it's a reference to the Silk Road. And it's a reference to those humble beginnings of globalization. Next sentence. Many have sought to discover the nature of globalization, and by extension, the nature of those who have globalized. So we've talked about that. We've talked about the nature of man. When it says the nature of those who globalize, the nature of mankind, although it doesn't make a list of man's this, or this, we can add those as potentials. Some people would argue man's exploitive, aggressive, irrational, selfish, violent, greedy. Others would say man's compassionate, empathetic, kind, cooperative. So even though those words aren't listed there, we know that that's part of that debate that they have introduced. So we add what's on the page. When the source suggests that many have sought to, by extension, know the nature of those who have globalized, we can infer that they're relating to the study into the nature of mankind. Added to this, society is divided as some see man as this, where others see man as this. Then the next sentence, to this end, globalization is a mirror, that if we look into it, we can see our true human nature. So, what does that mean? It's a mirror. Well, we looked at Milos in Athens today, and the quote, "The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must." And in that case study from 415 BCE, that's an event. We look into it, that's looking into the mirror of globalization, and we learn a lesson about the nature of mankind. The Athenian people were violent. They were selfish. They were aggressive. They were expansionist. The Molossian people felt that they were righteous. They felt that they had justice on their side. And they died for their honor. They would not bend the knee. They didn't see a pragmatic solution. So you can add to what's on the page. To this end, globalization is a mirror. Take an event in globalization we've studied, like we did today, and say, what did we learn about the nature of mankind from what we studied today? So just by breaking down this first paragraph, you may have half a page already. Following the Neolithic Revolution, so now they've mentioned it, groups of men began to build a variety of social, economic, religious, cultural, and political cornerstones that in different combinations became the bedrock of many different cultures. So they mention it, but they don't mention any of those specific cornerstones. So you could add to that. You could add to it by saying this is what a cornerstone is. And this is what some of the cornerstones were. This is what a religious cornerstone in Egypt was. And this is how it led to sexism. This is what an cultural cornerstone in Rome was. And this is how it led to, unfortunately, sexism. Seems to be a recurring theme. This is what a political cornerstone in Athens was, and this is how it was different than a political cornerstone in Sparta. And ironically, in Sparta, they had less sexism because of it, even though we think of Sparta as this warrior race of people. As our global village continues to shrink, we face today the same issue that Hammurabi did in 1754 BCE. Which cornerstones should we set as universal law? So again, it just mentions Hammurabi in passing, but it doesn't mention any of the actual content of the code. So you can further the perspective there by looking at, what laws did Hammurabi make in order to try to build some harmony among the various tribes relocating to his Babylonia. The most obvious answer is to promote the values of those who currently yield power, the strong, as their strength is the only testimony needed of the lasting value of their principles. Right here is an ideological perspective. This is when they announce it. And then it just gives you a solution of how they deal with the problem. This is how we're going to start on Monday. So take some time over your long weekend, get ready for that, and I'm sure you're going to do a good job. Keep in mind we still have 4 minutes left. I know the bell went, but that's not the end of class. So if you're like, oh no, we're going to be late for our next class, we still have 4 minutes. So if you have any questions, you can ask me. Clean up your Chromebooks and put them away. Clean up your desks as well.